Welcome to PEAC, Train Like a Girl, a podcast by girls in sport for girls and coaches in sport. We're here to amplify your voice. It deserves to be heard. And I think this is really important to point out. We are a safe place for girls to hang out, learn, grow, and build community. The reason I wanted to kind of emphasize that is there's so many podcast choices out there, and I honestly think there's some really good ones out there. But the thing that makes PEAC unique and different is we are really geared towards young girls, their parents, and their caretakers. This is always going to be a safe place for you to get information, and it's going to be a safe place for your girls to hang out. And you can always be assured that the conversations are going to be directed directly towards them. So I wanted to go ahead and fill you in there. I also, before I get Caitlin to jump on, I wanted to tell you about some really exciting things that are going on with PEAC. First of all, Caitlin, did you see that we launched our women-owned business giveaway? Have you seen that yet?
Yes, absolutely. It is so exciting.
It's completely amazing. So we have over $5,000 worth of everything from gear to food to clothes to workout apps available. All you have to do, all we're really asking in exchange is for your email. We're trying to grow our email list as women-owned businesses, and we are collaborating together. So it's a really good opportunity to get to know some women-owned businesses out there and to get some free goods in the meantime. So make sure you guys check that out. And the other big update that our other set of interns is working on is we are actually starting to categorize with both description and the reason for every single exercise we give out to a client or give out to an athlete. And they're all going to be linked to a video. And this has been a labor of love, to be honest with you. And my intern, Emmy, who has been working on that, has really, she's been amazing because it is not something I could have tackled on my own. So we're really excited about that. What is going to happen from there is we're going to be able to actually give personalized plans for both strength and mobility to our clients and to our athletes. And so be looking for that as we're kind of updating our app. Those are some of the things that we're going to be changing. So we're super excited about that. What's going on in your end, Caitlin?
Yeah, I'm super excited to be back on the pod. I know that we have not had an episode in a couple of weeks now.
Oh.
But yeah, I honestly have been very preoccupied with class and commitments here at school. So I'm just excited to be back.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. I know I hopefully will get some really good recordings in over the spring, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our next guest, Kelly. Kelly and I actually got to know each other, I think, originally through the other Kelly. Is that right, Kelly?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Lots of Kellys in there. But it's just really, Kelly is the owner of Her Huddle, and Kelly, the owner of Her Huddle, is doing really remarkable work connecting different experts and adding value to a really huge growing community there. I'm going to let Kelly share her own story and that from her being a girl in sport, but also she has a rebrand out there. So I want to learn a little bit more about that. So are you ready, Kelly, to get warmed up?
I'm so ready.
Yay. Cat or dog?
Dog.
Nice. Blow dry or air dry your hair?
Oh, definitely air dry.
Oh, very good. 4-star hotel or camping?
4-star hotel.
Breakfast or dinner?
Ooh, I'd have to say breakfast because I can have that any meal of the day.
Oh, you're gonna have to fill us in on that. I'm sure you've got some good nutrition tips around that.
Absolutely. I think breakfast is so easy to make into a balanced meal. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. Takeout or cook at home?
I'll go with cook at home.
Nice. Okay, our favorite question is lip balm or lipstick?
Ooh, does liquid lipstick count?
Of course.
And then I would go with liquid lipstick.
Oh my gosh, you're the first person to pick lipstick. I think we should have some type of prize. Katie, what do you think?
I am so excited. We have really been waiting for this. There's some type of prize, Samson. I don't know exactly what because we have not expected this, but there needs to be some celebration.
Oh
I
my
agree.
gosh.
Kelly, we're gonna figure it out, but there is something I keep thinking we're gonna get gear at some point. So I think there's a t-shirt or a hat coming to you at some point.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's too funny.
That is completely amazing. So why don't you go ahead and start? Fill us in. What is your experience of being a girl in sport?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a young girl, I tried a lot of different sports with my friends, but didn't really love running, which you have to do in most sports. So, I ultimately fell in love with swimming at a pretty young age and ended up doing that as my main sport. And I swam through childhood, I swam for my high school team. And by the time I got to high school, I didn't have as close of a connection to my coach as I did growing up. And so I kind of just fell out of love with the sport. I wasn't really improving my performance anymore. And just some of the fun of it was starting to disappear. So I didn't really have any interest in even trying to see if swimming for a college team was going to be an option. I kind of needed a break from it. But when I went to college, I joined this club that is essentially a fitness club for girls. And so every single week we would go to a different fitness studio. I lived in Chicago at the time. That's where I went to school. So we had a lot of options, but every week we would go to a different workout class together as a group. There'd be, I don't know, 20 to 40 girls working out together. And it really brought back the fun of exercise for me. It brought back that piece that I really loved when I was younger, which was really the community and meeting new people. And so I fell back in love with just being active overall. And through that club, I also did learn to love running because I had some friends training for the Chicago Marathon and I ended up running 1 year with them. So now I do all sorts of things. I still love to swim, but don't do it regularly right now. I fell back in love with the sport for sure. I run some seasons and I do different workouts kind of in the spirit of this club that I was in called CHAARG, just kind of staying flexible and always being excited to try something new.
That is so awesome to hear, especially growing up and gearing away from high school sports. It's always refreshing talking about how your fitness journey, even though it doesn't look like the usual sport that you put so much time and commitment in, you're still finding ways to commit to new classes, commit to new ways of moving your body, or even falling back in love with the sport after taking a time of break, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. It was hard to step away from my sport. Like, even though I fell out of love with it, it was just a huge part of my identity for my whole childhood. And doing this club where we could try different things and there was no one definition of what meant you were active or an athlete kind of reminded myself that I can change what I want to be doing at any point in time. I can have different seasons of different sports that I'm interested in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What was the camaraderie or, like, overall environment of being in those classes or groups with other women working together? What did that have an impact on you?
Yeah, it was so fun. We did so many different types of workouts that there was always going to be a bunch of us who were doing something for the very first time. We were doing, a typical spin class or strength training class or Pilates, but then we also tried lots of crazy things like a trampoline class and there was one class with like drumsticks, and I don't really know how better to explain it, but we were always trying something new. And so you didn't really have that fear of being judged or not being the best because we were all doing it for the first time. And so I think it just lightened the mood for everybody and made it a lot easier to look at as just this fun activity where we all get to move together and enjoy the endorphins that activity brings us.
Absolutely. That is so refreshing and healthy to hear.
Yeah. Okay, I'm super curious. Did you go to DePaul or Loyola? I'm just guessing here.
I went to Loyola.
Oh, 'cause that was pretty good to me, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That I'm pretty fascinated by that. I'd never heard of that club before. I'm definitely gonna look it up. And I'm not even sure Caitlin knows this, but I actually owned one of the very first aerobic studios in the city of Chicago above Goose Island Brewery
Oh
over in
my
the
gosh.
Clybourne corridor. Yeah. So I was, I think, the third one that opened up right behind the Chicago Sweatshop and Gymnastics, and then ended up selling actually, I sold to two professional baseball players, which is a crazy story, but then went over to Lakeshore Athletic Club because I had a no compete, so I couldn't do anything on my own. So I'm sure, did you ever get over there to Lakeshore Athletic Club?
I don't think we did. It was a lot
Okay.
of smaller studios that
Yeah,
we
that's
would
what,
go to because they would essentially be giving us a class for free.
sure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That is completely cool. Yeah, that's really fun. I'm sure that we at some point crossed paths over there.
Yeah.
And then does Loyola have a dietetics school? Did you have to go to somewhere after that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so they do now. They didn't when I
Okay.
was there. They didn't have a nutrition major
I think
or
they
a
did.
master's program. I believe
Okay.
it's like 1 or 2 years old.
Okay. So it is new. I didn't think that
Yeah.
they did. So where'd you end up going to school after that then?
Yeah, so I went to Hunter College in New York. Grad school is what brought me to New York City.
Got it. Okay, good. Okay, that all makes sense. All
Mhm.
right, I want to circle back to your beginning comments and then I want to kind of dive into what you're doing because you're doing really important work as a REDS informed provider and a dietitian fueling female athletes. So I want to make sure that we spend tons of time talking about that. But one of the things we are passionate about educating on at PEAC is the attrition rate of girls in sport. And you were part of that attrition rate. You fell
Mhm.
out of love with sport because of, and there's a lot of reasons people fall out of love with sport, but one of the big ones is a lack of connection with a coach.
Mhm.
And would you be open or willing to share a little bit more about that and how, perhaps the experience could have been different or better for you?
Yeah, so at my high school, swimming was one of the few sports that was a no cuts team, which meant our team had people all the way from this is their first time swimming laps and swimming competitively up to they've been doing it since, they were old enough to get in a pool. And we even had one girl on our team who went to the Olympics. So there was a really broad range of performance for our teammates. And the way that they placed us into training groups was really based off just a really quick, like, we did a couple of sprints for like kind of tryouts, but not tryouts to get cut, just tryouts to get placed in a group. And sprinting was not my forte. I had that endurance aspect and really loved the distance swims more. So I got placed at a lower group as far as
Athletic ability.
yeah, athletic
Yeah.
ability. Thank you. So
Yeah.
I
That's
was swimming
okay.
with a lot of people who are pretty new to swimming. And so that piece alone was pretty frustrating because the focus in our training was just things that I was doing when I was a lot younger. So I wasn't being pushed.
Mm.
And that was a big piece of it. And so through that, I just kind of felt like I slipped through the cracks a little bit. Like I wasn't really getting much attention from the coaches and the attention that I kind of needed to push myself for performances. So since I wasn't really being pushed in practice, I wasn't really improving in competition either. And it just wasn't really that much fun anymore.
Yeah, I think that's so important to kind of highlight is that in order to keep girls in sport, to be able to recognize there are girls that want to be there just to have fun or to learn
Mhm.
something new. And I didn't mean to use the word just, to have fun. So I'm taking the word just out of there. Girls that want to have fun, girls that want to learn something new, girls that want to hang with their friends. And there's girls that want to be pushed and challenged. And one of the things as a coach, particularly in a no cut sport, I also coach no cut sports, is that you got to be able to individually assess what the values of an individual athlete are and what is they
Mhm.
want to achieve. And if, because that is one of the reasons you do have attrition rate. You're either pushing kids too hard or you're not pushing them hard enough. I think we don't talk about that enough. I think people assume that coaches are being, too hard on athletes, but sometimes they're being too easy on athletes and that,
Right.
and then you lost the joy of it. So, yeah, thanks for saying that. And I think that's important. And I agree with what Caitlin said. I love that you were able to come back to sport and, fall in love with, the exploration of it, which I think is so important. But I would love to now kind of take a pause and talk about the really important your work you're doing in REDS. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, but just again to reiterate, REDS is capital R, capital E, capital D, small s. So it's relative energy deficiency in sport, and you are a REDS informed provider. So maybe if you could just explain a little about what that means and then talk specifically about your niche, which is being a dietitian for fueling female athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a REDS informed provider means that I took a course that's run by a really amazing dietitian named Rebecca McConville. And this course isn't just for dietitians, it's for anyone who works with athletes, from coaches to athletic trainers and dietitians included. So that's where the REDS informed provider comes from, is that education course that I took. And the work that I do with female athletes really encompasses all of the different passions that brought me to nutrition in the first place. So I've always been pretty interested in women's health. And one of the jobs I had most recently prior to starting my own private practice was at a women's health clinic. So I was working with women with PCOS and endometriosis and just missing periods, and they're trying to figure out why and how to get them back. And so that's a piece of it. But I've also always been interested in sports nutrition from just coming up in sports, and also the disordered eating and eating disordered aspect that can play a role and certainly impact sport. So through all of that, I really think that it's a unique niche that I can not only support female athletes, but also whatever else they might be experiencing. Maybe they're a female athlete and they have PCOS. Maybe they have struggled with disordered eating as an athlete and lost their period. So I really put all of those pieces together in my work. And all of that really falls under the scope of REDS as well. REDS is really any athlete or active individual who is underfueling and their body is starting to notice that they're underfueling and doesn't really have the energy that it needs to not only perform, but also go through life and, get out of bed, go to school, go to work, whatever it is. So all of those pieces kind of fall into supporting female athletes and their nutrition.
Yeah. And the difference between period health and period recovery, just as far as steps. So this is we try really hard or I try really hard as a coach and with our other coaches, having open conversations or creating space for open
Mhm.
conversations around period health, and obviously approaching it from if you're interested, or we're here as a safe place, because we do hand out period charts, which Caitlin actually designed. It's paper, so we don't want kids tracking on an app for a variety of reasons. And you don't have to do it. It's something that if people want it, they can have it. And so I think they're kind of trying to understand that. The part that gets hard, I think, is the period recovery piece. So can you talk a little bit on how you navigate and educate through those two separate categories?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're doing to open the conversation around periods. That's exactly
Mhm.
how we can do it, is just make it feel more comfortable by talking about them more frequently and providing the resources to learn more as well. But with period recovery, we're really talking about girls and women who have either lost their period completely, or maybe it's irregular, or maybe even it disappears during peak training and then comes back when they have some breaks in activity. So on the nutrition side of things, the way that I speak about period recovery is that oftentimes when we are underfueling, and that could happen unintentionally or intentionally, our period is one of the first things that our body kind of starts to ignore when it needs to allocate its energy, because it doesn't have enough energy for everything. So when your body doesn't have enough energy, it's kind of like going into low power mode. Like when your phone runs out of battery, it goes into low power mode and doesn't use all of its functions so that it can keep going for longer. And your body kind of does the same thing. And when we think about periods and the reproductive system, that's not really your body's top priority when it comes to keeping you functioning and keeping you alive. So it's not allocating all of its energy towards your menstrual cycle. And so that's why things can start to go haywire. And that's why nutrition can be a really big piece. Now, irregular periods and missing periods can also be a result of other medical conditions. So I'm always encouraging athletes or anyone that I'm working with to make sure that they're in conversation with their medical provider as well. We're not only taking the approach of nutrition, we want to look at them from a whole person perspective. But increasing their food intake or even just adjusting when they're eating and what they're eating can oftentimes play a really big role in supporting their hormone health so that they can have a regular period and bring it back if it's been missing.
So do you think it's possible from your expert experience, do you think it's possible for a high performing athlete who has lost their period to continue performing and get their period back?
I do. It's tricky. What we want to be doing when we're working on period recovery is finding that balance again where they're getting enough energy through food to match their energy output. So it can certainly be quicker sometimes if we are cutting back on activity level. And that doesn't even mean fully getting rid of being active for the time being, but sometimes that can really help move the process along. It really depends on the individual and where they're at in their journey. Are they also struggling with an eating disorder or disordered eating? Is that something we're also managing alongside of it? Are they in the peak of competition season and feeling really passionate about being able to continue because they're not injured right now? It really depends on an individual basis, and it can be really, really hard to step back from your sport. And I understand that, and other resident form providers and athlete providers understand that too. So that's why it ends up being a conversation, and it's not always an easy answer as to whether or not they definitely can continue performing or definitely should stop.
So I'm curious too, and this is for my own because I'm trying to decide whether or not this is a useful use of time and energy. But when you are at a large high school, we are super fortunate to have access to trainers that are on staff. Like we are
Mhm.
so blessed, as many large high schools in the United States are. And they recognize things like, stress fractures or that's after obviously being diagnosed, or concussion protocols, or if the kid has a broken arm, whatever it is. Do you think that loss of period should be a physical reason for an athlete to discontinue sport for a period of time, the same way they would if they had a stress fracture or a broken leg or
That's a
concussion?
really great question. I I would kind of compare it to getting a concussion where it's going to
Same.
be
That's what I
up
kept
to the
saying.
individual basis. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like the severity can certainly differ. And when it comes to
Right.
period loss, how do we judge severity of a missing period? Maybe that depends on what we're thinking some of the causes might be. Like, again, managing an eating disorder is going to take more time than, maybe some education where there's just some missing pieces in someone's diet. So I definitely think it needs to be considered one of those flags where, okay, what's the next step to this? Having some sort of game plan for the school or the organization when that comes up on what to do and who to contact. But yeah, I think comparing it to a concussion is a good comparison.
Yeah, that's why I kept bringing that up, because it is, you can't, it's hard to diagnose a concussion, and it is
Right.
somewhat arbitrary, and it is, yeah. So that's, yeah, I'm trying to decide, and the reason I am passionate about it is that in my experience, it seems, and it does seem like the science also supports this, is that athletes who have lost their period do have a higher incidence of stress related injuries in the sport that I coach.
Mm.
And so I'm thinking, if you already know that they don't have a period, does it make sense to adjust the training accordingly prior to an injury happening, another physical injury?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. And your menstrual cycle health and bone health are really closely linked because estrogen plays a role in both. So with
Hmm.
period loss, we're likely talking about some imbalance of your hormones going on. And so that can certainly be impacting so many other things in your body, which is why REDS came to be. Because it's not just one thing that's altered, but our hormones do so many different jobs in our body that we have to look at the bigger picture. And the bone stress fractures is such a big piece in athletes.
Yeah, I agree. So what would be some tips if you're looking, let's kind of step away from period health and period recovery and talk about fueling athletes, and whether it's a 16-year-old athlete or a 66-year-old athlete. Like, what are some tips that you can be giving female athletes specifically on how they can fuel for performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a really good foundation is to make sure that you're trying to eat every 2 to 4 hours. And if you are an athlete and you're very active, you're probably going to be hungry at that frequency already. But something I work on with clients sometimes is that they lose sight of their hunger cues. And that's something that we have to learn to bring back. And so that can be a tricky piece if it's missing, but that's a really great starting point to try and make sure you're eating enough. And being mindful that whether or not it's a day that you have a workout, you still need to be eating at a higher volume than just the average person. So, as an athlete, you have really unique needs compared to a non athlete. And so, a lot of the general nutrition recommendations don't necessarily apply to you. And when we're talking about how much you need, that's a big piece of it. So eating more frequently can be really helpful with that. And remembering that even if it's a rest day, your body needs a lot of energy to rest and recover and build muscle and all of that. And so you still have higher needs even if it's a rest day. And then the other piece of recommendation is just to be mindful of hitting all of your food groups as often as you can when you're eating. So, in every meal, ideally, you're getting protein, carbs, and fats. And when I say carbs, that's going to include your fruits and vegetables, but also whole grains, and at snacks, having at least two of those. So that's a really good way to make sure, or at least work towards getting all of the nutrients that your body needs. We're hitting the macronutrients, but also all of the different vitamins and minerals that these different macronutrients can provide you. So being mindful of that balance can help take some of the guesswork away, because the more variety in your diet that you have, the more nutrients that you're giving your body. And it's okay if some meals from time to time don't match that. Maybe you have a fun pancake breakfast and there's not a protein or fat in sight, and that's totally fine. But it's kind of what you're doing on a regular basis that can have the biggest impact.
Yeah, well, everything that is being said, I with especially relating to your tips given, I mean, I experienced a trial and error of being a cross country runner in high school and trying to figure out what frequency of eating, how much was eating, because obviously being a high school girl in athletics can be so difficult with comparing what you're eating to your non-athlete friends. But
Mhm.
I remember I found so much success with my energy levels after I packed snacks in addition to my meals, because you cannot just be eating the meals and be working out and being active at such a high rate and not thinking you're going to have these major drops in energy, because having snacks throughout the day to keep your energy up and have more longevity is really so crucial. And I saw that firsthand with my performance. But yeah, I think especially making sure that you're getting a variety of ingredients with your food groups, that all you're including, because you can really tell the difference without a balanced diet opposed to with. And it's firsthand experience of what works and what doesn't. So all the points you said are 100% true.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned the trial and error piece of it as well, because that's a big part of nutrition. Is there's no one right answer. It's going to be unique to every single person. And so there is some trial and error of figuring out what works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's being coached by Samson. I remember her saying how this isn't, or the diets, like, and just snacks you would recommend, they're not one size fits all for girls. I know all my teammates and I we had very different snacks and lunches, and it really is what works best for you. So yeah, definitely trial and error.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I know this can be an over talked about conversation, but one of the things that's frustrating for me at the fitness end of things, and I've got to imagine it's as frustrating at the nutrition end of things, is this thing called social media. which is out there giving quote unquote advice, is, I listened to a podcast today, and it was so good, but there was a trainer, a coach who did not have a nutrition, because I went and looked, did not have a nutrition background, nor was she a certified trainer, but she was a high performing Olympic athlete. So
Mhm.
she had experience as opposed to expertise, but she was talking about you should only eat steak for dinner and you should cut out all, simple carbs and no dairy, and, you need to be protein and fat heavy. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what are we doing? But like, ho kids are looking at this and listening to it. Parents are looking at this and listening to it, and coaches are. Like, what are some tips there? Just try to stay clear of some of the clutter and some of the noise.
Yeah, it can be really confusing seeing all of the different information on social media because a lot of it's contradictory too. But
Mhm,
I have two main pieces of advice for clients that I work with. So this would apply to athletes and parents. But first one being, you always want to ask, is this person talking to me? So it doesn't even matter if their advice is sound if you're not their target audience. Maybe they are talking specifically to male bodybuilders. Maybe they're talking
mhm,
specifically to
GP.
postpartum moms. So everyone's nutrition needs are different, but also there's different groups that have different recommendations. So that's a good place to start because if they're not talking to you, why bother looking any further? But if they are talking to athletes, like in your example, then that next part is to see, are they a expert in what they're talking about? Do they say that they're a registered dietitian, or, if they're giving advice on other topics, you might want to be looking at, are they a therapist? Are they, whatever their credentials may be? And do a little unfollow spree if you find you're getting a lot of information that doesn't feel fitting to you, or even just information that stresses you out. Sometimes just, seeing people who share pictures of what they're eating all the time might stress someone out, and that's totally fine. If you don't feel comfortable in following them, you can even mute them. And I know that doesn't necessarily keep away things that you're going to see in the For You page, but at least it gives you some sense of control over what's even popping up in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a journalism major, Kelly, so we talk about false information on social media all the time, and it really feels so discouraging, like, to have these influencers that are basically, I mean, regardless of audience, there are certain information being spread that is just blatantly false, which
Mhm.
as young athletes, high school athletes, even college, that anyone is taking in this false information is so disheartening and sad because there's not the correct verification that would be needed for them to have correct information to actually benefit them, and it can be actually harmful. I mean, simply being on social media, and now I'm really aware of the content that I'm taking in, but before, when you're just mindlessly taking information and seeing dietary advice that is not necessarily beneficial or even factually true, can be really detrimental. So I really hope that we see a shift towards actual licensed dietitians and nutritionists that can give real information instead of influencers.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually reminded me, a part of my club charge when I was in college, we all had charge Instagram accounts where we would like share our workouts and we'd connect with people who are in the same club at different universities. And it was a really fun way to choose exactly what I was seeing on that account. So I had my personal account where I could more interact with my peers. And then I had this charge account where I was getting to choose exactly what type of content I was wanting to see. And that could even be as another thing that you could try if you're getting frustrated with all of this misinformation coming in, or you feel like you can't unfollow people that are bothering you because you know them personally. You could make another account and tailor it exactly to what you want to be
That's
seeing.
hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's a great
I
idea.
call Caitlin and I'm like, "Caitlin, I noticed that you unfollowed me."
Never, Samson. I'm a loyal follower.
Oh my gosh. It's tricky. It's a tricky world to navigate, and quite frankly, I mean, I do need to say this because I had this conversation with a client also. Even if people aren't getting recommendations, which is different than advice, like going to a coffee shop with your friend and asking them a question and getting their advice, right? Which is
Hmm.
different than thinking you're getting someone's expert opinion, as Kelly so eloquently said, specific to me, which is, very hard to do. But even if they're not using social media, a lot of people are using AI and
Yeah.
they're literally giving the responses that they want to hear, and
Hmm.
it's crazy. I have had people say, yeah, I'm not using a doctor anymore, or I'm not using a therapist because I'm using, and I was like, is that really where we've come? And certainly I know there's so many useful tips to it. I just think that getting medical advice that's specific to your specific needs has to continue to be done in a very thoughtful way with people, humans who are experts at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the piece that the AI will never be able to provide you is that human connection. And when it comes to
Mhm.
nutrition, that means we're also taking into account your lifestyle, your food preferences of the people you live with, because maybe you're sharing meals, and that's never going to be something that's incorporated in the response from AI unless you're, asking for a meal with very detailed advice and which or with very detailed prompts, which in which case is though maybe one way I do recommend using AI for nutrition is like meal ideas.
Right. Yeah, listen, there's benefits to it. I'm not saying that. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think you're exactly right. The human piece is gone, the humanistic. And that is why, in my opinion, it is why we are all here, right? That human connection. Like we do better when we're connected to real people and real moments. And I think that is true. So, and that's when you're talking about food for me, as someone, that grew up with an eating disorder, it was really important for me to get back to realize that food is communal and it's something that should be shared and something that should be done together. And I think that that's really important. It's such a even with the travel that we are fortunate enough to be able to do now, it's one of my favorite parts of traveling now. Is just seeing the way
Mhm.
different communities, eat and how they prepare food and the love that they show when they're preparing food. And I don't know, I think a lot can be said through food. What do you think about that, Kelly? Is food a love language for you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I absolutely love traveling and trying new foods, and living in New York City, there's endless amounts of new foods to try. I think
Yeah.
the message that food is fuel is super important, and once
Yep.
you have that, you want to expand on it as soon as possible because food is so much more than fuel too, as you were saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, we're going to get wind down here. So I would actually love to know if you were having a dinner party, what would you cook for your friends? If you had nothing but time and money, what would you put on the menu?
Ooh, that's such a great question. I'd probably start with some sort of fresh, crusty bread with an oil dip or butter or something like that. And then what would I make? I love cooking salmon. So
Yum.
I think a salmon maybe with like some potatoes and veggies. And then I would definitely make something really fun and extravagant for dessert because I love baking more than I love cooking. So anything chocolate. And if I have all the time in the world, I would probably dive into making a cake.
Oh, yum.
Love that. I know.
Mhm.
Are you going to invite Caitlin and I?
We'll be there.
Once I find the time.
We would actually we're putting ourselves on the dinner list. Actually, what I want to learn today, I am not a baker. I don't. It's too exact of a science for me. But I would. But I wish that I was a baker. It's something that I aspire to be, or I aspire someone who is a baker to just drop things off at my house. That's really what I hope for. So if
I love
anyone's
that.
listening and you're a baker, I'll give you my address as I'm done. Just feel free to drop it
If we
off.
lived nearby, I would love to drop off baked goods.
There you go. Exactly. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time out of your full life to be here and to share with us all the good work you are doing as a REDS informed provider and a dietitian that helps female athletes fuel. It is such an important conversation and is one we are absolutely passionate about here at PEAC. So if you guys are tuning in and you like what you heard, the simplest thing you can do to help spread the magic is share us with a female athlete or coach you love. Until next time.